thank you everyone so much for coming to our event, panel event, More Money, More Problems. My name is Max Stahl. I'm the National Political Director for Democracy Matters. We hope you find the event interesting, inspiring. Please take pizza. It remains. It's a wonderful Domino's pizza, very high-end, at Harvard. So just to give you a quick background of Democracy Matters, we're a national, nonpartisan student organization with 68 chapters across the country, founded in 2001. What we do is we organize around money and politics issues, so voting rights, public financing, things of that nature. Over the last year, we focused pretty heavily on the presidential election. We developed a pledge called the Restore Democracy Pledge, which we asked presidential candidates to sign. So the pledge says, I support restoring democracy by publicly financing elections and getting big money out of politics. If you were to go online and look at the Democratic Party platform, that text is in there, and actually Restore Democracy is on the top there. And of course, we ask Republicans to vote as well. So that's us. So I just want to do a quick, brief introduction of our wonderful panelists here. So I'm going to introduce them and then ask them to speak for a minute or two about their own work and their connection to this issue. So first, over here on the left, we have Morris Pearl. So Morris currently serves as the chair of the Patriotic Millionaires, which is a group of 200 high net worth individuals who are committed to building a more prosperous, democratic society where everybody has a voice. So the group focuses on policy solutions that encourage political equality in all sorts of aspects, so both in terms of voting rights and also tax fairness, like that. And prior to this, Mr. Pearl was the chair of BlackRock, which is the largest financial institution in the world, managing director, sorry. So now, Morris, would you like to speak?
Sure. I've spent quite a few years in the financial services world. As Max said, most recently as managing director at BlackRock. And working on figuring out how much these bank bailouts were costing the taxpayers was actually my job. Our biggest client was the U.S. Treasury. And then we got similar assignments from Her Majesty's Treasury in the United Kingdom. And one day I was working with the Bank of Greece. And I was at a big meeting on the top floor of a bank building overlooking Sophocles Street in downtown Athens. And I saw a group of people walking down the street. At first I thought there was a parade. I thought this is not a holiday in Greece. And then I realized it was kind of a riot, kind of moving towards Sonoma Square where the parliament meets. And I thought, I just wondered to myself, is there really any more am I really helping these people in the room behind me? Or the rest of the people on the street in front of me. And I wasn't sure, and I decided to change course and work on politics and policy full time. And that's what I'm doing.
So, thank you. Great, thank you. Thanks, Morris. So our next panelist is looks like, Professor Renaldo Pearson. He's a member. Not a professor. You can be, she's was a member of Democracy Spring's National Coordinating Committee. So Democracy Spring was a national coalition of groups that came together to march on Washington in April, where people got arrested, including some of the folks in this room, fighting for Congress to actually take action on democracy. So yeah, you want to talk a little bit about yourself and this work?
Sure, yeah, so Renaldo Pearson, as you just said, I'm actually acting house administrator there at Winthrop House.
Yeah.
Strauss Cup champions, I had to put that in there. No, but before starting here at Harvard, back in December of last year, I went to Morehouse College, the alma mater of Dr. Martin Luther King and Julian Bond, now late Julian Bond, Spike Lee, and a few others. And so you can't go through Morehouse without getting indoctrinated with that civil rights movement, justice fighting DNA. Got that 5 years ago, back this weekend, headed to Atlanta right after this, I taught my 5th year homecoming reunion. 5 years ago, got that Morehouse kind of springboard into movement building, and I read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of color blindness, and was completely arrested, pun intended, by it. I was losing sleep over it. I was like, how is it that, we only have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners, and they happen to be disproportionately black and brown. That's a core foundational democracy problem. And I saw that all the movement building I was doing with Alexander, and spokesperson of the End Mass Incarceration Coalition, which is over 200 members, icons and celebrities and academics and civil rights leaders, and I was the youngest person and the only non-icon representing. I was like, we pushed the Obama administration and Department of Justice to move the needle, but there was still something missing. We were getting incremental changes. I said, there's something missing here. And I heard about this guy named Larry Lessig, and this TED Talk he did. And it made so much sense to me. It became so clear that it was true, that we were hacking at the branches instead of at the root. And that if we were to, for me, end mass incarceration or close the equality gap around economic inequality, whatever the case may be, whatever issue it was, we had to first deal with this core issue of campaign finance and democracy. That was the thing that was blocking all of the progress. So that's what inspired me to answer the clarion call that was issued by Democracy Spring. I see at least 2 students here who joined us in that march from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. We were on the first leg of it, the first day of it, from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. And then we sat in and waged the largest act of civil disobedience in America this century. 2 days later, we received a letter from about 100 congressmen signing on to the legislation we've asked them to pass around voter and primary campaign finance reform. So, that's me.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you so much. The private prisons, I think, are one of the, and this mass incarceration in general is probably, one of the worst outcomes of kind of the current money politics regime we have. So thank you. So finally, we have Frances Moore Lappé, who's asked me to call her Frankie. Oh well. So Ms. Lappé is the author of 18 books, including Democracy's Edge and Getting a Grip. I think you can, Adam, where's Adam? So if you're interested in buying one of these publications, find Adam after the event, and he can make it happen. Very cheap, apparently. Not in content. So they observed, examined living democracy. With Joseph Collins, her latest work, World Hunger, 10 Myths, identifies democratic practices as key to solving the global hunger crisis. So Frances is also the co-founder of 3 organizations, including the Small Planet Institute, which is based right here in Cambridge. And Frankie's received 18 honorary doctorates, as well as the Right Livelihood Award, which is often called the alternate Nobel. So, Frankie, the floor is yours.
And my shiro, by the way.
So, I'm just very, very excited to be here. Briefly, I have a metaphor that describes my life pretty well, is I've been in one stream since I was a community organizer for the War on Poverty. Actually, I was a covert agent, that's a longer story, but nonetheless, I was an organizer, door to door. And when I stopped and said, wait a minute, I've got to understand how we get to this level of injury that seems absolutely necessary, I thought food. If I could just pull the food thread, that would untangle the knot of economics and politics, and I know what to do with my life, and I was 26. So when I discovered, sitting in the library, really putting 2 and 2 together, that there's more than enough food in the world, my mantra soon became, hunger is not caused by scarcity of food, hunger is caused by scarcity of democracy. And so I have been swimming in the stream with 2 currents. My food stream, as you heard, I just had a new book last year on world hunger, but the rest of my life I commit to stay in the democracy stream. They're both essentially related, but I came up, for air, so to speak, in my stream. And I said, I want to help build a democracy movement, and just at that moment, I learned about Democracy Spring in April that you just heard about, and so I took part in that, and it was life-changing, and I hope to have time to refer to it a little bit. And in the process, I got to know and write with Adam Eichen, who is a Democracy Matters board member, and we are now down the street from here. We're writing a new book on the democracy movement, which we're really excited about, helping to move the movement, this movement of movements.
Great. Well, thank you, Frank. Why don't we give a quick round of applause to our panelists. So I'm going to ask a few prepared questions. I'm going to ask the panelists, and then around we're going to aim for a quarter of to open it up to audience questions. So you can use the time. Start thinking about something, spark something in you want to hear more. Please ask the question. So to start with, anyone can take this. So what do you think constitutes political corruption? Anyone want to take that?
Tough one.
This is hard.
Well, I think political corruption really means those people with money having more political power than those people without money. And it's not corruption in a sense of, oh, I'm not going to vote on a bill because my donor told me not to, or, oh, if I take this vote, he might not donate money to me. It's more insidious, actually. It's more a matter of access. For instance, one of the problems Renaldo mentioned is these for-profit prisons. And there's been huge issues, particularly in Pennsylvania, of even judges who are part owners of prisoners and are now prisoners themselves, but that's a different story. But it's the same story in every issue. The people who are owning the prisons and making money and managing them, they have a huge incentive to go to their legislators and tell them about these common sense problems and these common sense solutions and how problems can be solved with some simple legislation. But the people on the other side, the people whose lives get ruined by these for-profit prisons, they don't show up at their legislators' fundraisers and pay thousands of dollars for a drink and a few minutes with a legislature. And they don't show up at meetings in Washington with, with groups coming to lobby for different things. So it's a matter of access. I think after a while, and a while maybe just a few weeks, the legislators kind of forget that the people who show up at their fundraisers are not the only people. And they're not even representative of their people. I was at a meeting once where a senator, a United States senator, said, oh, it's a good thing I'm not a self-funder like this other candidate is, because it's only events like this where I get to meet regular people. And I thought to myself, are you out of your mind? I was too polite to say anything at that exact moment, but we were 1,000 miles from this district, and a penthouse apartment was paying, with a group of people who paid thousands of dollars for a glass of wine, and more importantly, a few minutes to talk to the United States Senator. And he honestly believed it, though. I think they've kind of forgotten that they only hear from certain people, and that certain people have a huge incentive to make their case known. As many people, like including Warren Buffett, have said, it's very hard to convince someone of something if his livelihood depends on him not understanding it. And every industry, the people who run that industry, they honestly believe that they're on the right side. They honestly believe that they're doing something good. And even if all they're doing is earning a living to support their family. And the people on the other side who are being damaged by the industry, they're not there.
Really quickly, yeah. I think the key word that Morris just said in all of that was insidious. Because political corruption today is not the political corruption of last year and yesteryears, where textbook bribes and quid pro quo, and that still happens. But today, political corruption is more systemic than individual. our Congress members today spend 30 to 70% of their time fundraising for the next election. And we know that the vast majority of those funds comes from the tiniest slice of the 1%. We're talking about less than, I believe it's less than 60,000 families, and even less than that. It's like 400 or so families when we talk about the super PACs, so those who fund the super PAC. So if you have a context where they're always spending their time fundraising, and they're always kowtowing to that tiny slice of the 1%, and those are the folks they're naturally being responsive to on every issue that matters most. It's funny how we can watch the polls and see that, for instance, and this is the best example, gun control. That's something that polls better than anything else. In fact, the next thing on that list now is campaign finance reform. That's great. But gun control, across party lines, everyone agrees, even folks who are members of the NRA, that something needs to be done about this. And over again, after each tragedy, nothing happens. Because there is a strong gun lobby, the NRA, who obviously gets a lot of money around the sales of the billions of dollars that come from gun sales. So the more and more these folks fundraise from this tiny slice of the wealthy, then our political process will continuously be corrupt. And it's the system, because I've seen and worked with, even when I was an intern, and some of you all have been interns on Capitol Hill, these people aren't necessarily bad. They don't go to Capitol Hill saying, I'm going to be corrupt. But the end product is just that, because they're not being responsive to their constituents and to us. And they're not being, more importantly, being responsive to the public interest. That's political corruption. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree completely with what's been so beautifully stated. One thing I wanted to just underscore about systemic is that often people think that what's been described is fairly recent, and I just want to give you some evidence that is now more and more cited, but there was a study done by two distinguished political scientists that covered the 80s and the 90s, and tried to see if there was a correlation between what citizens' positions were on public policy and what actually happened compared to what the elite interests were on public policy and what actually happened. And the conclusion from this, remember this is back 80s and 90s, was that average citizens had near zero impact measured by any relationship between their wishes and what happened, whereas the elite interests had considerable impact. So this is evidence of systemic corruption that is not the kind of simple quid pro quo. And I would say that one of the most pernicious aspects of that corruption is the corruption of our very definition of what it means, our First Amendment rights. For example, that we've reduced the idea of the right to speak from any connection to the right to meaningfully being heard. And so I think, for me, the metaphor that captures this corruption is that, yes, we're all invited into this wonderful auditorium. We all can speak, but only a few of us can afford and are allowed to enter with our electronic megaphones. And so we can speak to our heart's content but not be heard. And I think that's how even our thinking has been corrupted. That we say, oh, well, we still have free speech as long as we can continue to spend money in politics and blah, blah, blah. No. We have to go deeper to the meaning of it and meaningful speech.
Well, thank you. And that study, by the way, is by Martin Gillens, 2014 from Princeton, if you're interested.
So we're Asian pizza that's to sit on the podium?
What?
We're Asian pizza that's to sit on the podium?
Yeah, everyone, they chipped in for our enormous dominoes and that stuff. So it sounds like everyone on the panel agrees that there's a problem and that we need to do about it. But in your opinion, what does campaign finance reform actually look like? What kind of reforms do we need to do, and what's sort of the path to get there? Becky, do you want to start with that?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. This is what I'm trying to really believe. This is not rocket science, folks. And then we do have examples now. One that I've been following for a number of years is the state of Maine, which if you can show One of my favorite examples is a woman who was a waitress in Auburn, Maine. In the year 2000, her friends saw leadership in her. Because they have clean elections in Maine, all she had to do was get $5 from 50 people, showing that she was a credible candidate, and then she got enough money from public sources, from the public purse, to be able to run a credible campaign and get elected and become an absolutely stellar legislator in the state legislature. And once you accept that public financing, then you cannot accept private donations. And it worked for a long time. It's a longer story, and her story is both the good, bad, and the ugly of it. But because outside money came in after she was reelected several times, and now Maine has come back with a stronger law to protect people like Janet Simpson. But the point is, this kind of approach, another campaign finance approach that we can do now with our current makeup of the Supreme Court is a matching funds system, such as John Sarbanes, who's my hero in Congress, has put forward the government by the people, which is six-fold increase that for every small donation you get six-fold increase of match from the government. And so you can run a credible campaign if you do not take private funds. So we can do this. We've shown at the state level, at the city level, like now it was in New York City Council and Seattle. We can do this. We have models that are working.
That's right. Yeah. So as Francis already said, it's certainly not rocket science at all. The bottom line is that we want to amplify the voice of the 99%. How do we do that? So she already alluded to the public matching that is put forth through John Sarbanes' legislation. There's even conservative legislation out here, voucher system. So a public financing system, but I don't think we should stop there. Right? Of course, there's also the limits, also in terms of what the super wealthy can contribute to a political campaign or cycle, since they technically don't contribute to the campaign. It's a super PAC, right? But we don't stop there either, and that's why I love Leslie saying that we should call this citizen equality. Because it's more than campaign finance reform. We're talking about core democracy reform. So there's a campaign finance aspect of it, but then there's also voter suppression. Right? And what that looks like in terms of purging voters from the rolls, voter intimidation, voter ID laws in the name of voter fraud that pretty much is non-existent. All these things contribute to our voices being suppressed. I want to make sure we're very clear about, and that's what the Democracy Spring is about. We're not saying just the campaign finance piece. We're also saying the voter empowerment piece. And there is an act that Congressman John Lewis, civil rights icon, has put forward to go along with this legislation around campaign finance, or would restore the right to vote for felons who serve, ex-felons who serve their time. It would make sure that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is restored in the way that the Supreme Court, of course, has recently got it. And we would also try to attack gerrymandering. All of these things, and even getting to, making sure we don't close voting places, the early voting dates, and close those at the last minute. It's a lot of stuff going on around voter suppression and voter intimidation, and it's really hard to keep up with. It's getting to that point. Where it's like, are you serious? Did they really just do this? In Ohio, they're investigating something right now where tens of thousands of voters have just been purged from the rolls. So I get nervous, even though the polls suggest that the election will go one way and not the other. Nothing is assured, and we've seen how this thing can go. So I just want to make sure we're clear on not limiting the conversation to just the campaign finance piece, and understand that this is also to include voter suppression and voter expansion. I like Bernie Sanders' idea also of a national holiday. I think that's important. We need to make it easier. There's no reason that we're supposed to be the greatest country on earth and less than 40% of our voters are actually participating in voting.
Great. Well, thank you for widening the discussion like that. That's great. Morris, do you have anything to add?
Sure, I agree with what Renaldo and Frankie said. I think all of those issues are very very important. Depending on who is in charge and controlling our Congress, we could get a new Voting Rights Act, and that would be a very good thing. I think it's, all of these issues are very important. I live in New York, and we have different policies now. The reason we have different policies than we used to is because we have different policy makers than we used to. And it's because of our campaign finance reform laws, which are very similar to what Frankie discussed in May, not exactly the same, but same idea. And if you have different people in this legislature, you'll get different legislation.
So how would all of you respond to the argument that the Supreme Court put forward in 2009 in Citizens United that political spending is speech? Do you think that's valid? If not, I think pretty soon most people here don't think it's valid, but why? Why is that argument not valid?
Same order? Well, yes, I do not think that it is valid. And certainly there have been, we want to underscore that even beginning with the 1976 Buckley versus Vallejo decision, which began to open the door to this idea of spending a speech, even in the wording, if you look at the wording of that court ruling, that there's language there that could take it exactly the opposite direction, because it said that in fact the First Amendment, fulfilling the First Amendment, depends on protecting the widest dissemination of diverse points of view. This is not an exact quote, but very close, and real controversy and real antagonistic views for the purpose of people participating in making meaningful changes to benefit the people. So that the First Amendment isn't just some isolate separate from connection with political agency. And so even this decision, we could go back to it and reclaim it for exactly the opposite of what the 2010 Citizens United came up with, this idea, because money facilitates speech, therefore we can't limit that facilitator. Clearly, that going back to my metaphor of this room where we have to be heard to have real speech, if we're not heard, it's meaningless. Then of course the Supreme Court and all it would take, I think, is one different person on the court to reverse that back to the idea that, of course, protecting the right to be heard is foundational. So that, I think this equation of spending the speech is a real, just a very unfortunate, confusing, and wrong. And I'll say a little bit more about Citizens United, though. I also am concerned that so much of the attention to the problem of money in politics has centered on that decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's really problematic, because I think that, and so much of the energy that I get exposed to a lot is we need a constitutional amendment. And I think, I'm sure most of you know, that down the line it would take 3/4 of all states to pass. And the point is that would take a very long time, and we do know now we have legislative solutions, and that also it leads us to this false notion that somehow Citizens United began the money in politics problem. And no, like those numbers I was giving you from the 80s and 90s, this is a long-standing problem. So there are a lot of other issues related to the court decision, but fundamentally, I think this equation is completely wrong, and I think there's even language by the court over time that has defended limits on spending to protect the free speech, to protect the First Amendment.
Yeah, I would agree. Money is not speech. Speech is speech. But beyond that, exactly what Frankie just said about Citizens United not being the start, right? But it actually just opening the floodgates. It just made it exacerbated the situation. And as I, you really, Frankie, I'm glad you made that point about how it kind of can really kind of lead one to just give up, essentially, by looking at that and saying, oh, why, okay, so we need a constitutional amendment. Oh, okay, how do we do that? Wait, it takes that, all these states have to come together to pass. Yeah, we're never gonna get out of this, right? That's not the case. While we welcome, a movement for a constitutional amendment, I think that's great. The actual practical solution is the legislation that is in Congress right now that can be passed tomorrow if we push Congress to do so, right? And that's why it's so important for us to organize movements, because if we look at history, the only thing that has really worked in terms of sea change, I'm not talking about incremental change, in terms of sea change, the only thing that has ever worked are mass movements. Nonviolent direct action and the ballot. So the ballot, the vote, and the bill simultaneously as we push our president and our Congress members to do what the people want to do. And when we had no clue, when we did democracy, we had no clue that, first of all, those people would show up, right? And then that, march and then get there, and that we waged the largest African American civil disobedience this century. And then 2 days later, nearly 100 congressmen would respond. Right? This didn't even make mainstream media, interestingly enough. They would respond in the affirmative, calling for the Republican-led Congress to hold a hearing on those pieces of legislation that we called for. But that's how it starts. Now the onus is on us to continue that fight.
Yeah, I strongly agree with Frankie that the Citizens United decision is not the beginning of the problem. Changing won't be the end of the problem. And also, it's through our entire history of our nation, I don't think it's any great secret that people with more money have found life much more than people with less money. I was able to come here from New York for the day and speak to you because I don't have a regular job. I have to work for a living. Justin does, this is part of his job. So we're not going to change the idea that people with money can have influence. But I think what we're going to do is give more influence to people with less money through things like the programs that Frankie talked about that are in Maine and Seattle and New York and Connecticut and I think a few other places soon. So it's not a matter of doing something to get rid of the billionaires. Yeah, we'll have a few billionaires here and there, but somebody has to represent them too. But I think what we want to do is come up with a system so that anybody, whether you're a waitress or a billionaire, has the same amount of power, or almost the same amount of power, to run for Congress and make your case to the people of your district, your state, and maybe get elected. And you don't need $1 billion, maybe you need $1 million or a few $1 million. But I think if we can get a Congress that's truly representative of the people of this nation, yeah, 1% of the people in Congress will be part of the 1%, and that's okay. But we'll have a different legislation, we'll have different legislators. Democracy matters.
Really quickly, Morris just touched on something that hasn't really been addressed a lot in this conversation around campaign finance reform, democracy reform. That is the piece that, on one level, yes, it's the public interest piece to it, right? Making sure our voice is heard. But on the other level is, there's a reason why Congress continues to look, the same over and over again. If more people of color had a more equal way of running for Congress, they would. But they don't have the same connections to millionaires and billionaires to bankroll them into Congress. So it's a two-sided coin in terms of being represented in Congress. So it's on one side, citizens making sure their voices are heard to the congressmen and to their representatives, but the other side is empowering them to run themselves.
Great. That's really the perfect, sorry.
Well, just on that point, in Maine now, I just read that Maine has the most working class legislators in the country because of exactly what you're saying, that people, the non-elites, are really able, like Deb Simpson, to run.
Great, that's a great point. So I just want to finish with 3 questions directed at the panelists, and then we'll go on to questions from y'all. So Renaldo all of them, usually, your last comment was a perfect transition. So what do you see, you touched on this a bit, what's the role of activism in campaign finance reform? And, through Democracy Spring and other parts of the democracy movement, how have both campaign finance reform and voting rights and all these issues been pushed to the forefront, and what do we need to do to keep it going?
We need to keep the fight. We've got to keep the fight. This is, what is it, marathon versus sprint? It doesn't end, and interestingly enough, Coretta Scott King, upon her husband's death, said something that I'll always remember. I was going to paraphrase the exact word, but she pretty much says it's up to each generation to not only guard the change, but to win their own fights, right? It's easy to say, wow, didn't we fight this 50 years ago? Right, and it's easy for, Black Lives Matter activists to look at the pictures and say, yes, we fought this thing. I thought we were fighting for this 50 years ago. But it's important for us to remember that it never ends. And that, yes, we have to, one, guard the change, but we also have to make sure we're vigilant to make sure there aren't new encroachments, I should say, on our liberties and freedoms. So the role that activism plays is what I see happening now, not only through Democracy Spring, and remember, we're a movement for a nation. We come from all these different walks of life. We came from the mass incarceration movement and others from the climate and environmental justice movement, and women's rights, LGBT rights. We're coming together, and that's gonna continue. We have some things planned right after this election, because we had a certain candidate to promise that she would, I'm sorry, I gave it away, move on the legislation that we had called for in the first 100 days of her administration. So, we plan to hold her to that, and that's what it takes. It's not us saying, vote for this person, or go for a strategic vote of this person and stop it there. No, we've got to. The best example of that is FDR. A. Philip Randolph approached FDR about all of the issues facing African Americans and race relations in America back in the 1930s and 40s. And he gave a long list of grievances, legitimate discontent, as Dr. King would call it. And at the end of that conversation, you can actually still find this audio recording online, interestingly enough. FDR said, essentially, I agree with everything you just said. Make me do it. And here's FDR. He's probably the most progressive president we've had, right? But he said, make me do it. That's what's required. We've got to keep the fight because that's the only way change comes about.
Amen. Absolutely. So, Morris, when did you become involved in campaign finance reform? And how do your colleagues from the investment community perceive you doing this kind of work?
Frankly, most of the people I've spoken to are kind of jealous that I don't have to do what they do anymore, and I get to have fun talking to people like you. I mean, people in the finance world are not really any different than people in any other industry. They're doing the best they can to do their jobs and earn a living and support their families. And, they have jobs to do, and they need to make money to earn a living. And they just happen to fall into a finance business instead of some other kind of industry. There's no grand philosophy, really, that, finance is the only good thing. No, not really. It's just, and most of them, are upper middle class people who, are probably more wealthy than the average college professor, but not millionaires and billionaires. There are less than 1% of the people that are in the 1%. So I got into this business. As I said before, I've just sort of decided one day that I like doing things to help people and do things, and I like feeling like I'm actually doing something for people. And one day I decided I've done as much as I can for these people, and it's time to do something for some other bunch of people and the rest of the world, as opposed to helping a few friends and my family get very rich. I'm hoping to help a lot of people get rich by sort of making our country move away from inequality, which isn't working, and towards a society with more people participating in economic and civic life for our nation. It's really only by having everyone participate that we can have the kind of businesses that entrepreneurs are trying to start. The vast majority of people trying to start businesses are not worried about their tax rates. No one is moving to the deep south because they're looking for a state with lower minimum wages. And no one's moving to the deep south because they want a place where it's considered okay to discriminate against black people. People are moving to places where there are people with money who can buy stuff, and people who can participate in their businesses and work in their businesses and help them. That's why places like San Francisco and New York and the area around Boston here are doing well and growing, and not the areas in places like Alabama and Mississippi. And so that's what I'm trying to explain to the rest of the country, or at least a few people I can talk to, that you will all be better off if we're all better off. Democracy matters.
Great. Fantastic. Great answer. So, Frankie, you've written extensively about all these issues. So, from your experience, what aspect of campaign finance reform have you found most difficult to explain to your readers? And what have you found the most rhetorically persuasive in terms of arguments?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to broaden your question a
Do it.
bit, because I want to
Please.
answer that question, but a kind of bigger question, like what aspect of what we're talking about, the democracy movement, is the most challenging to communicate? And I think you've touched on it so effectively, but I just wanted to add, in addition to the new Jim Crow, I mean, one of the pieces is we've got to embody in everything we do is we're talking about one movement. The money out of politics movement, the voting rights movement is one movement. And books like this, The Great Suppression, Give Us the Ballot, New Jim Crow, they're all telling us that, okay, my generation, I was there, a community organizer in the 60s, we thought we'd won these battles, and oh my gosh, you read these, and you realize the assault against them started immediately, so that, to quote William Hastie, the first African-American federal justice, democracy is not being, it's not, it is becoming, it is easily lost, and never finally won. And so, in that spirit, what I really want to communicate, what Adam and I want to communicate, because we experienced it in the march, is that this movement of movements, this democracy movement that bridges all of these and brings them together, involves a very deep emotional component. That we think of democracy as like, oh, that's the spinach, we've got to eat that dull stuff before we get our yummy dessert of personal freedom. No. What we experienced in this march, these deep internal shifts that are so joy-fulfilling. One of them has to do with bonding with people you'd never in the world meet, you know, like I had these long talks with veterans who I would never meet in my daily life. And out of that experience, I felt, oh gosh, I'm not really alone, you know, I can move out of my circles, and they also are deeply motivated by the same passion for democracy. We also realized it's how we
got arrested together.
We got arrested together. Yes, and so there's that dimension of it, and then there is the dimension of what we think of as civil courage, of stepping up, the power of doing what you could not think you could do. I didn't know I could walk 10 miles, and I marched 110. And my brain said, oh, Frankie, I think maybe you could do something else you didn't think you could do. And so that thrill, it's really a thrill of being with others and doing what you thought you maybe could not do. And so there is these deep sense of also, as we marched toward the Capitol, and I saw the dome for the first time, and we were chanting, whose democracy? Our democracy. Whose democracy? Our democracy. I had this sense, oh yeah, it is mine. That sense of ownership. And I just started bawling. I think a lot of other people were bawling.
But we were also scared. We saw a sea of blue.
Yes, we did. But I wasn't but the idea that we're not just protesters on the outside, knocking on the door, we own it. It's our democracy. And that is another piece of the thrill. So this is the hardest thing to communicate. And we need new songs. We have, if anybody wants to see, we do have an idea for a democracy sign. The D is the American Sign Language for the letter D, and when we were on the Capitol steps, I was going, one person, one vote. So anyway, that's the hardest thing to communicate.
Fantastic. So now I want to open it up to questions from the audience. Sure, sir.
Hi. I love the discussion. Thanks for putting this on. I actually do research at the Kennedy School on Congress, so I specialize on Congress. There's a couple narratives that I think get left out that are actually quite interesting. Few people recall that in 1969, Nixon presided over a Congress that was easily, maybe the most equal society on earth in all of time. So income inequality was at an all-time low. Political partisanship actually was at an all-time low. Sorry. Lewis Powell writes this famous Powell memo. And if you read it, it's actually really interesting to see that he's complaining about one thing in particular, that corporations have no power in Congress. He's like, all corporate America does is care about consumers, voters, and the environment. In July of 1969, they had just passed the EPA, which is still the last piece of environmental legislation that really is worth anything. They just passed the voter rights. They just passed a number of beautiful bills. So Congress was actually crushing corporate America. Campaign finance was also at an all-time low and had been throughout history. It actually wasn't increasing. It starts increasing less. It points it at 74, but it looks like 1970 makes sense. We've never correlated anything to do with campaign finance and changing votes. And Colony of 2014 basically says campaign finance is probably not even the big deal that it is. But we've made one correlation that we're going to be publishing, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that in 1916, when they first tried to do electronic voting in Congress, Congress turned it down because they said, if you open up the vote of Congress, if you open up the committees, this will give all powers to lobbyists. Lobbyists who are always left outside of the door. That's why they're called lobbyists. They were left outside of all committees until 1969, actually 1971. 1971, we opened up all committees, all of them. So if you were talking about environment, it was closed in 1969. 1970, it opens. No one's talking about this. No one knows if the Legislative Reorganization Act did this. So we've correlated transparency to corruption.
Well, I think it's unfortunately true that a lot of the efforts made in the late 60s and early 70s sort of to increase democracy, transparency, changing from the caucus system to primaries in many states, did have different effects than may have been intended at the time, and may have had deleterious effects in some cases. We don't, like, a lot of those, the famous civil rights bills were passed when Lyndon Johnson was the head of the United States Senate, and he ruled with an iron fist. But he could do that. Now, each senator has more power than they did then because of different rules, and the leadership has less authority, both the House and the Senate, and there's less ability to get things done. It's true. I mean, I agree to that extent. We've had, we have people like the current candidates who are running being elected, to represent their parties by primaries, not the same kind of people who would have been elected, only in the late 1970s when there were party conventions in different states that selected delegates and nominees. So I mean, I think it's true that having a more popular participation in democracy through transparency, through primaries, through other things, has resulted in a more populist view of things. That's also why, I was just writing earlier, why the secret ballot is important. Not because of privacy for individuals, but because having a secret ballot prevents coercion. If nobody knows how you vote, no, you can't get in trouble with your boss or your leader or your friends for having voted a certain
Or
way.
the NRA.
Or the NRA, or anyone else for that matter.
The NRA
So-
didn't know how people
Yeah,
voted in
both as
60.
an individual, both individuals voting for candidates and Congress people voting for bills. Now, anybody can sit in the gallery and they can see it projected on the wall, the list of all the members and exactly how they vote. Which sounds like a good idea, but does have consequences.
Hi, so in two separate questions but closely related. What do you think is the best response to income inequality, and do you think narrowing the income inequality gap through, let's say, income taxes might have a more positive effect on narrowing the ability of elites to contribute to the politicians' conversation? And secondly, do you think that, on a whole, democracy would be better served by making the length of a campaign shorter? And if so, do you think there would be any ways to make that happen on a national or even statewide scale?
A lot of things in that question. So to the first point, can you say that first point?
Sure. Do you think that maybe a federal income tax,
Yeah.
like the way we restructured it in the 80s, allowed for more political influence and that?
Yeah, so on income inequality, and Robert Reich and a few other notable economists are certainly the masters of this subject. There are quite a few things that can be done to combat it. Right? We know that the tax piece is a part of it, and we know that raising the minimum wage is a part of it. We know that reining in on exorbitant healthcare costs is a part of it. All these things, right? We know that even reining in on student loan debt is a part of it. Because we also know that in terms of the GDP, 70% of it is consumer spending, right? And 99%, we don't have much right now, but if we increase the expendable funds that we have, discretionary funds that we have, then that makes the economy much better. But the thing about campaign finance, and this is what a point that Lessig has made so very Lessig, we can't do any of those things because that requires legislation, right? Until we do this first. So it might not be the most important issue, right? But it's the first one. Until we do this, this is the Hoover Dam, to use a visual, that's blocking all other egalitarian progress. So until we do this, we're going to continue to face diminishing returns on every other front. And that's why I'm in this fight.
I agree with Renaldo. Let me ask a question. How many people here have enough savings to afford to take a year off without pay to run for office? I think we got somebody who said that. But that's the problem, is not that you guys are lacking in income, but you're lacking in wealth. The people who run for office have to have enough savings to take a year off and do something without any pay for about a year. And not very many people can do that. So the problem of society inequality is not so much income inequality, although that is a problem, but it's really wealth inequality. I don't have any income, I'm unemployed, but I have enough wealth to support myself and my family. So I think that's the real inequality, as we've said.
I'll jump in here. I agree, and I also believe that I believe that we human beings, we creatures of the mind, that we create the world according to the ideas that we hold. And the Powell memo represents not just marching orders to the Chamber of Commerce. This was some Lewis Powell who then became the Supreme Court justice. But it was a mindset that indeed, if we just remove the public sphere from the marketplace, that as Ronald Reagan called it, it is magical, the magic of the marketplace. And so what the mindset that is, I think, contributed, the underneath it all is the mindset that we just take our hands off, the market works best by itself, but it's not any kind of market. Fundamentally, it's a market that returns highest return to existing wealth. So wealth accrues to wealth until we get to this ridiculous position where now, the last report I saw, 20 people control as much wealth as the bottom half of us. So in that degree of inequality, this makes our challenge of, so I'm just saying that part of what I think Democracy Spring and all of us, democracy diehards are calling for too is a new vision, that to replace this market reductive notion that everything can be decided, including politics, can be decided by who can pay the most, that we have the principle of voice for all at the heart of democracy, and that we can make decisions together in a democratic dialogue that is only possible if we all truly have meaningful voices. So we have to, I think, dig that deep, and I'm really glad you brought up the Powell memo, because that was, to me, the beginning of the end of the idea that the public sphere was legitimate and could be democratically organized. Thank you.
Well, first, I was at Democracy Spring. I was arrested on the first day. I'm a member of a small residents working group here in Cambridge that is trying to push for publicly financed elections. We have met with all the city councilors. We had a formal committee meeting where we had a formal presentation. We brought in the Common Cause from Massachusetts. We brought in Free Speech for People, and we brought in the executive director for the New Haven Democracy Fund, because New Haven has publicly financed elections. And we thought they were about the same size as Cambridge. This is great. The councilors loved the idea, but what we heard from them, both at the meeting and individually, is all these benefits sound great, but we don't have a problem in Cambridge, so why are we trying to solve something here?
They don't have a problem. You have a problem.
So that's going to be my question. So that was the one thing. The other thing that they came across is, how are we going to finance this? Where's the money going to come from? Because we pitched like either matching funds or vouchers or something of that nature that would come out of the general fund. But they were like, that money can be better spent elsewhere. So if you have advice on how we can push this, and anyone who wants to join, we are a very small group. We're looking for new members. We're trying to get this across in Cambridge. We think people want this in Cambridge, but we're running against this with the council.
Could you give us your name again?
Sure, my name is Ann Taylor.
And how would we reach you?
So my email is on the list. It's A Taylor. Yeah. But yeah, our group is called Cambridge Residents for Responsible Elections, and we have a Facebook page that you can click on us there.
Yeah, we'd like to plug you in. We just did, Democracy Spring just did a national training.
I know, and we didn't have it in Boston. I've been working with Julia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the national training was something that we did for everyone to come in New Jersey. But then we empowered those 100 people, and that was we were very intentional about being diverse in that training. People of all walks of life and cultures came to that. So then they were empowered to go back to their cities to do local trainings. So they can do this very thing, city by city, state by state, until we win. So we're going to be in touch, because there are already some things afoot. And there's always a complaint about not enough money. We heard that time and time again. But when we pressure folks to respond, particularly folks who want to keep their jobs, they respond. So that's what I mean by keeping the fight. Don't tell us there are no funds. Where there's a will, there's a way. And this is what the people want. And by the time we get to a point where we feel like we're being represented, that's when we'll have more legislation and policies from local level to the federal level that will reflect the type of wealth and income equality that we want to see. And we've seen the research behind this, by the way. Richard Wilkinson, who's an epidemiologist, had another TED Talk. And he talks about how societies that are more equal economically actually do better across all the social indices. Right? Public health, crime, you name it. Right? So we're going to win, and we're going to be connected, and we're going to do some nonviolent direct action right here.
I love it. It's great. So we're running a little over time, but I just want to say last questions. Anyone want to do the final question?
So, I'm not sure if I got this right, but it was my understanding that the Supreme Court ruled that you can't force public financing of elections at some point decades ago. And like, say in Europe, there's a lot of countries where you have equal funds for each candidate, and it's publicly financed, and there's no private money allowed, and that this was ruled unconstitutional.
My understanding is that anyone can spend their own personal money.
So it's possible to ban private money? It's not.
No, it's not. It's unconstitutional to ban private money.
We could change the Constitution, of course.
You can't force public financing on the
No,
campaign.
So that seems like a big obstacle.
Well, I think it works fairly well, even if not everyone participates. In New York City, not everyone participates in the public financing system, but enough people do that it's really changed how the New York City Council looks. You know, it's kind of like with your Easy Pass system, even if not everyone uses it, everyone still saves time. Well, maybe that's a bad analogy, but like as I was saying before, it's okay if 1% of the people in the City Council represent the 1%. But it's not okay if 99% of the City Council represents the 1%. So I think public financing can do hugely wonderful things, even if not every last person participates in it.
Yeah, so we give them the option, but the people force the change,
Yeah.
right? Because we make it so objectionable for you to stick to the old way of doing things that you'll certainly want to, do the new way of public financing. So that's the way it's done, unless of course we do the Constitution.
You know, if I'm running for mayor, if I wanted to run for mayor of New York, I would not need to match Michael Bloomberg's $50 or $60 million to put in. Even if I had 10 million against his 50, I might win. You know, I mean, I'm not saying I would. I'm not saying I'm planning to run for mayor either. You don't need unlimited amounts of money. You don't need to prevent the other guy from having unlimited money. You need enough money to run. 1 million for city council or 5 or 8 million for mayor of citywide race is enough money to run a campaign, even if the other guy has a lot more money.
Great, well, thank you everyone so much for coming.